They told us student loans were an investment in the future. In truth, they are a time bomb buried under the U.S. economy. 43 million Americans sit on a mountain of debt, not mortgages, not credit cards, but student loans, a $1.6 trillion burden that rivals the GDP of nations like Mexico or Spain. This isn't just a personal tragedy. It's a national fault line, one crack away from unleashing an economic earthquake. Because what most people don't realize is that student debt isn't simply about tuition. It's about power. It's about money that compounds silently in the background. It's about a trap designed to lock generations into a cycle of payments they can never escape. Look at the numbers. From 2003 to 2024, student debt in the United States grew by over 570%. During the exact same period, wages rose only 8%. Think about that. A degree got more expensive. A paycheck barely moved. The gap became a canyon. And into that canyon, millions of young Americans leapt, believing what they had been told since childhood, that college was the only path to success. But here's the hidden truth. Those loans were never just about education. They were about creating an asset class. Student debt was bundled, securitized, and traded just like mortgages before the 2008 crash. For Wall Street, your diploma is collateral. For the government, your future income is a revenue stream. And now, the system is beginning to creak under its own weight. As of early 2025, nearly 10 million borrowers are in late-stage delinquency. Millions more saw their credit scores collapse by over 100 points in a single quarter. The result? A sudden disappearance of nearly $60 billion in consumer spending power. These aren't abstract numbers. They decide whether someone gets approved for a car loan to get to work, whether they can rent an apartment in a safe neighborhood, whether they can buy a house, start a business, or raise a family. This is how student debt metastasizes. What began as an investment in knowledge becomes a chokehold on the very engine of the American economy, household spending. And yet, here's the most chilling secret. The system is designed this way. Interest is front-loaded, payments barely touch the principal. Even forgiveness plans, when they exist at all, are buried under fine print and bureaucratic traps. It is not a bug, it is the feature. The result? A society where ambition becomes punishment, where a law degree, a medical license, or even a half-finished community college program can become a lifelong chain. This is not just about young people. 1 in every 5 Americans hold student debt. Even seniors over 60 now owe billions. Parents can't fund their children's education because they are still paying off their own. This is how debt spreads across generations, like a virus. And the virus has reached epidemic scale. Student debt is no longer just a burden on individuals. It is a threat to the financial system itself. The same way subprime mortgages once looked manageable, student loans are now whispered about in financial circles as the next contagion. Because when tens of millions can't pay, the system doesn't bend. It breaks. To understand today's student debt crisis, we have to rewind the tape, decades back, to when the seeds of this financial time bomb were first planted. The story begins in 1965. That year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Higher Education Act. It was meant to democratize opportunity. For the first time, millions of young Americans could borrow directly from the federal government to pursue college degrees. It was sold as an investment in the nation's future, a way to create a highly skilled workforce and fuel American prosperity. The intentions were noble. The results were catastrophic. By the 1972nd, college was no longer a privilege of the elite. Enrollments surged, but so did costs. In 1970, a year at a public university cost less than $500 in tuition. By the early 1982nd, it had tripled. By the 1992nd, the era of mass borrowing had begun. Then came 2007. The financial crisis shattered the U.S. economy. Families lost homes, wages stagnated, but higher education costs kept soaring. From 2003 to 2024, student debt didn't just grow. It exploded, rising more than 570%, tripling since 2007 alone. Wages, by comparison, crawled upward by just 8%. The gap between education costs and earning potential became unbridgeable. But instead of fixing the system, the government doubled down. Loans were easier to get. Loan limits expanded. And private lenders entered the game, bundling and securitizing student loans the same way they had packaged subprime mortgages. By the early 2010 seconds, borrowing became an expectation. College for all was the mantra. Guidance counselors repeated it. Politicians campaigned on it. Parents believed it. 18-year-olds signed promissory notes they barely understood contracts that would follow them for decades. The system grew on myths. The myth that a degree guaranteed a high-paying job, the myth that student loans were good debt, the myth that higher education always pays for itself. But the reality was darker. By the mid-2010 seconds, default rates were climbing, and the pain was uneven. A black college graduate in 2020 still owed 105% of their original loan balance 4 years after graduation. White graduates owed 73%. Asian graduates owed 63%. Education, instead of equalizing opportunity, was amplifying inequality. Meanwhile, the debts themselves became heavier. In 2008, the average student loan balance was around $23,000. By 2022, it was nearly $40,000, a jump of 39%. And for many graduate students, doctors, lawyers, scientists, the burden passed the $100,000 mark. This was the beginning of a trap, because unlike credit card debt, unlike medical bills, student loans were uniquely vicious. They were almost impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. Once you signed, you were chained for life. By the 2020 seconds, the consequences were everywhere. Parents delayed retirement because they were still paying loans. Young adults delayed marriage, buying homes, and having children. Entire generations were being held back. But the true turning point came after the pandemic. For a brief moment, borrowers were given relief. Payments were paused. Interest was frozen. A generation exhaled. Then, on the 5th of May 2025, the party ended. The Department of Education restarted collections, wage garnishment, tax return seizures, aggressive pursuit of delinquent borrowers. And just like that, the fragile balance snapped. Millions saw their credit scores collapse. $60 billion in spending power vanished. The cracks in the system had widened, and the pressure building beneath the surface could no longer be ignored. But here's the haunting truth. That was only the beginning. The real crisis, the true explosion, was yet to come. It began like a sudden storm after years of silence. On the 5th of May 2025, the Department of Education flipped the switch. For the first time in 3 years, the machinery of loan collections roared back to life. The pause was over. The bills were due. But this was no ordinary repayment cycle. This was enforcement at scale. Wage garnishments, tax refund seizures, collection agencies calling borrowers day and night. A crackdown, unleashed on a nation already staggering under inflation and stagnant wages. The impact was immediate. Within weeks, nearly $100 million was collected from defaulted borrowers, but the cost was devastating. According to the New York Federal Reserve, 2.2 million Americans saw their credit scores collapse by more than 100 points in the first quarter of 2025. Another million fell by 150 points or more. That single number tells the story of millions of shattered lives. A credit score is not just a number, it is the key to survival in modern America. A low score means no car loan to commute to work, no apartment in a safe neighborhood, no access to affordable credit cards, forcing families into predatory lending traps. The ripple effect was staggering. Economists estimated that the resumption of collections stripped $60 billion of consumer spending out of the economy. That is the equivalent of shutting down entire industries. Restaurants closed, small businesses withered, families delayed major purchases. And behind every statistic, a face. The nurse in Ohio who borrowed $35,000 to attend community college but dropped out to care for her mother. Her balance today is $58,000. She can't buy a car, so she takes 3 buses to reach her night shift. The engineer in California with $120,000 in loans. He earns 6 figures but lives paycheck to paycheck in San Francisco, where even a good salary barely covers rent. By HUD's 2025 standard, his household is officially low income at $154,700. The 63-year-old retiree in Florida, still paying on Parent Plus loans he took out for his daughter 20 years ago. He mails in a check every month from his Social Security income. They did everything right, and yet the system is swallowing them whole. This is the moment where the illusion shattered. Americans began to realize that student debt was not just a personal responsibility. It was a national vulnerability, a hidden weakness in the very foundation of the economy. Because once enough borrowers collapse, the economy itself begins to stagger. Defaults spread like cracks in glass. Lenders absorb losses. Investors retreat. The same spiral that triggered the 2008 mortgage crisis now looms over student loans. And yet, what we see, the garnished wages, the collapsing credit scores, the vanishing consumer spending, is only the surface. Beneath it lies a mechanism far darker. A financial machine designed to ensure that debt never truly disappears. a trap that thrives on interest, capitalized balances, and repayment plans that keep borrowers enslaved for decades. This was not an accident, it was engineered. And to uncover how this trap works, we must peel back the layers. The real secret lies beneath. On the surface, student loans look simple. You borrow money, you repay it, case closed. But behind the curtain lies a machine designed to keep borrowers inside the system for decades, a system that ensures the lender always wins, even when the borrower loses everything. Start with the structure of the loans themselves. Most federal student loans are amortized. That means in the early years of repayment, your monthly bill is almost entirely interest, not principal. A graduate makes payment after payment, but the balance barely moves. The message is psychological and crushing. No matter what you do, you'll never escape. Then comes capitalized interest. If you miss a payment or enter forbearance, the unpaid interest is added to the principal. Suddenly, you're paying interest on interest. The debt snowballs. What began as a $30,000 loan can morph into $50,000 or more. This is why so many borrowers report owing more after 10 years of repayment than they did when they graduated. And then there are income-driven repayment plans. They sound compassionate. Payments are capped at 10 or 15% of income. The promise, manageable bills. The reality, many payments don't even cover the accruing interest. Borrowers stay current, but their balances grow larger every year. It is a treadmill disguised as relief. This isn't just mismanagement. It is systemic design. Think about it. Student loans are one of the only major forms of debt in America that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Medical debt can be wiped clean. Credit card debt can be erased. Even mortgages can be written down through foreclosure. But student loans, they follow you for life. The system ensures that lenders and the government have a guaranteed stream of revenue no matter what happens to the borrower. History has seen this before. In ancient Rome, debtors unable to pay were bound into nexum, a form of debt bondage. In 19th century America, freed slaves and poor farmers were trapped in sharecropping, working land they didn't own, forever paying off advances that never disappeared. In each case, the mechanism was the same: endless obligation, disguised as opportunity. The modern version is student debt. You are not working a field, but you are working a lifetime chained to a loan that compounds faster than you can pay it down. And Wall Street saw an opportunity. Beginning in the 2000s, student loans were securitized, bundled into asset-backed securities, and sold to investors, just like mortgages before the 2008 crash. To banks and hedge funds, your debt is not a tragedy. It is a product. It generates predictable cash flows. It can be traded, packaged, and insured. The irony is brutal. For borrowers, student debt is suffocating. For the financial system, it is gold. This is why the system resists change. Cancellation threatens investors. Bankruptcy protection threatens government revenue. Universities continue raising tuition with impunity because they know federal loans will cover the bill. Everyone gets paid except the borrower. The cycle feeds itself. Rising tuition fuels larger loans. Larger loans fuel Wall Street securities. Securities fuel political donations. Politicians defend the system. And students keep signing on the dotted line. It is a perfect machine. A hidden mechanism of control. But here's the most unsettling truth. This is not just a historical curiosity. It is not locked in the past. The mechanism is alive, right now. Every month, millions of Americans send payments into a system that was engineered to keep them in debt. And the more fragile the economy becomes, the more explosive this arrangement grows. Because when this mechanism finally breaks, when defaults accelerate, when balances become unpayable, when the illusion of control collapses, the fallout will not be limited to students. It will ripple outward, into banks, into housing markets, into the very foundation of the U.S. economy. And that moment is approaching faster than anyone admits.